Well, I can't.
All right, I think we're live, maybe. Yep, we are live. Hey, hey, what's happening, everybody? Stone Guy 223. Thanks for tuning in. Fat Albert. Look, already fucking up. We've been in the chat like
That's you, the one
20
that's.
seconds. Jesus, where's
What's
the
happening?
eject? Where's the eject button here? Anyway, so I appreciate everybody tuning in. This is going to be a little different. We're going to do kind of a knife chat tonight. So anyway, let's do some introductions and get the formalities out of the way here. From my left, we've got Tactical Six String.
What's up, guys?
Next to him, we've got Ghost Town Custom Knives.
Yo.
And then we've got Moon Food.
How's it going? Thanks for having me.
And Mr. Cork 71.
Hey guys, actually sharpening a knife right now.
And next to him we got Walt.
What's up, folks?
And then Wesley.
Hello. On account of my false reporting, I would like to play the role of Dan Rather this evening.
Hey, there you go. All right, so Knife 101. So we do have an actual knife maker in the house, and me personally, I've been really, ever since I went to Blade Show this past year, I've always been a fan of knives. I mean, I've got a pretty decent collection, but I really have gained a new respect for knives and the knife makers after going to Blade Show, and so I've been doing a lot more research and just fascinating how many different steels there are and different techniques and designs and how many actual knife companies there are out there other than the mainstream ones we're all familiar with. So anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about, what kind of knives you guys prefer and, how many knives, obviously I would hope that everybody carries a knife with them every day. Just all the fun stuff we talk about guns, I think we could carry over to knives and have a decent little discussion about it. So, let's see here. And if anybody wants to ask questions, I will be looking at the Gun Channel's lobby. If someone wants to look at the YouTube side, I can't get the YouTube side, but if you look at YouTube and throw in any questions you see that are relevant out there. So I guess first things first, let's just go through with what you carry, if you carry a knife. We'll just do a quick left to right with just if you carry and what you carry. So let's go with Six String real quick.
Yeah, definitely carry. I find I have the tiny Cold Steel Recon Micro. That thing is always in my pocket. That thing really is a true miniature Recon. It's an awesome tiny little knife. I mean, it's small, but it's a little Tanto, and I love that. But I always that's just a little backup. I carry usually the paramilitary too, pretty much every day. Or sometimes I like my SOG Aegis. I have the SOG Aegis and the Mini Aegis. I like the Mini. It's a great little lightweight knife, and it's a real deep carry. So I like the little knives because I don't use them a ton, so they tend to do the job for what I need them to do.
All right, Huck.
Well, I am a knife maker, so I do carry knives every day. Currently, my current EDC for the last few years, I've been carrying the Cold Steel Spartan as my main pocket knife. I also have a Swiss card in my wallet, which is just like a little flat credit card thing with a knife and tweezers and all that in it, like a Swiss Army knife. And then pretty much all the time, opposite my strong side sidearm, I carry a fixed blade. These days, I'm carrying a Buck 124. Just pick that up. So yes, I always have knives on me, and I do switch out a lot though.
That
All
is
right.
a knife.
Moon.
Yeah, right now I've been carrying for a year this Kershaw Cryo. It's a little beat up, but it still works pretty good. All the rest of my knives are just ones that I've been collecting, so I don't really use them for anything.
All right. Court.
Well, if you haven't seen my channel yet, you know I like knives. I got a lot of them. Yes, I do carry knives every day, and that is plural knives. On my keychain's a little Swiss Army penknife and a Cold Steel Super Edge because those things are freaking awesome. Best sub $20 you can spend on a little knife that you'll use for opening those frustration packaging. That's what I call plastic stuff. That's what I use that for mostly, but it's on there for other stuff too. Wear a neck knife, a Cold Steel spike. I got the Bowie spike. No, the Tokyo spike, excuse me. And then 2 pocket knives. I do carry, always carry my Cold Steel tie light. I just love the way that thing just opens right out of the pocket with a little catch. And I've been carrying my Benchmade Reptilian 553.
This dude.
Holy shit! So you literally carry like 6 or 7 knives every day?
Well, on my keychain there's 2. 2 in my pockets, 1 on my neck, so 5.
Oh,
Right.
semantics. 6, 5.
I forgot to mention I carry a multi-tool with a folding blade on it as well.
It sounds like 5 to me. It's like a small dinner party worth
All
of
right.
knives.
Jesus. All right, Wesley. Or I'm sorry, Walt.
Well, I only carry 1, so I must be a failure. Spyderco Delica 4 with an Emerson clip. That's one I carry all the time. I have a bunch of knives, but that's my favorite.
That's not a failure at all.
Yeah, that's enough. It's light, and I like it.
Hell yeah.
And now Wesley.
Well, I'm a failure too. I just got a Buck 110 that I got from Huck. A little Gerber folder that I keep in my truck all the time. And well, I always carry the Buck, and I keep 2 or 3 knives in my truck, and that's about it.
Right, and I primarily carry a 0 tolerance. Between that and my Benchmade, I'll switch those out depending on that. That 0 tolerance is a little bulky if I'm wearing dress slacks, and then I definitely keep a fixed blade in my computer bag with me at all times as well. But that's not on my person. So for the most part. I know me in particular, I'm real hesitant to carry or even own a knife for that matter that's a liner lock versus a back lock. Now I don't know, I just something about just that little piece of metal on the inside of the liner that holds that blade closed. I'm real hesitant about owning or using one of those.
About when you grip it, you activate the lock.
Well, exactly. That's what I'm scared of. So I've always been more of an old school, and that's weird because all the knives I can remember as a kid growing up and collecting all my old case knives and different things like that have always been back locks where you have to push that little thing on the back of the spine to get the knife to close. And it seems here lately that a lot of knife makers are going to a liner lock system, and I just don't get it.
I love a liner lock. I have no problem with it personally. I mean, you're grabbing it the opposite way, and it's the pressure's going into the lock, not pushing it out.
That depends.
And and I like the one-handed, I like a one-handed operation.
This has a liner lock. I accidentally got this closed.
Yeah, I've had it
on my hand before. Just by
Is that the crowd? There's a difference between liner lock and a frame lock, actually.
Yeah, frame lock and liner lock's a little different.
Yeah, frame lock, it's actually the liner there's no liner. The frame itself bends in and locks the blade in. But regardless, they're still both more dangerous than a lock back. I can just say that from years and years of experience. I got my first knife when I was 8. My dad was a knife maker my whole life. I'm a knife maker. They are more dangerous. They're not they're not all dangerous. It's not something that happens all the time, but it can happen, and that's enough to keep me away from them.
Right. Just like on a gun, safeties can fail, so can a liner or a lockback could fail just after.
That's a
years
good
and
point,
years.
Mark. And if you follow all the rules of safety with a knife, you won't worry. It won't matter if your lock fails or not, because you won't cut yourself. But as we all know, things happen, and sometimes you have to cut towards yourself.
That's why I like the compression type. I don't know, is it a compression lock on the Para 2? That top kind of piece? I mean, the inventor of it said it's one of the strongest locks he's ever made, and
It's
I
like
just
a
love the
liner lock,
functionality.
actually.
Yeah, it's like a reverse liner lock.
Yeah, the
But he said it was
Spyderco
really
minis
strong.
have those too. The little
Yeah.
mini
Which
Spyderco.
knives have liner locks? Like, does a regular buck knife?
Well, like a Delica and a. Oh no, they don't. Not that. I mean,
I can do a quick tutorial real quick, since I have a bunch of them laying here.
Awesome.
This is a lock. This is a lock back, where the button you activate is back here, just like any buck knife. It's
Yeah.
the lock is on the rear. Let me see. A liner lock is like this Camillus Cuda right here, where this is your lock button, and you push it upwards to unlock the blade. That's a liner lock. A frame lock would be where that liner is the actual outside of the frame, where the black plastic is here.
here's a frame lock right here.
Right. Yeah.
There's the Kershaw. This is a Kershaw Barrage, actually, which is
Those
called
are the most
Salva.
defeated.
Yeah, this is the cheapest one. So this is a frame lock.
Right.
Cool.
So that's obviously there's some personal preferences involved in choosing a knife. Me personally, I'm just more secure with the lockback, and then I don't know. It just seems like what's that new? I think Cold Steel came out with it, the Tri-Lock system. You
Yep.
familiar?
The triad lock.
Yeah, it's just they've adapted it to a lot of the different their models of their knives, and they've showed them hanging 100 pounds, 150 pounds off this knife, and that locking system holds up.
That's an easy thing to explain too. Here on a regular lockback, your spine and your blade come in contact right here. That's your mating surface. And on a triad lock, there's a bar in there that actually absorbs all the tension and all the pressures. And that little pin, that little bar right there, is what makes it a stronger. And like Stone Guy said, they clamp these things into a vise like this and then hang like 600 pounds on them. And every time the lock wears out or breaks a little bit, it fits tighter and tighter and tighter. So they don't wear out, they wear in. It's actually a really ingenious system.
Right. So
While
Cold
still
Steel.
needing a lock back.
Yeah. So I'm just as far as, and that's the other thing. It's like realistically for heavy duty work, I really think you should be using a fixed blade knife because for a pocket knife that's a folder, where you either have a lockback or a liner lock. I mean, you really shouldn't be doing anything. So like real heavy work where you would have to worry about the liner breaking. Like if you're putting 100 pounds of force on your little folding pocket knife, you've got the wrong tool, in my opinion.
I kind of hope, though, when I carry, that it could be dual purpose because you don't know if it's going to be put into a tactical role. So
that's a good point.
And I mean, I personally trust that paramilitary too, and I would, it is what it is, and that's what I carry the most, and I would trust it if I had to use it tactically. But it's an excellent knife for every day, so I like it. Then that's
right
for me.
Now,
But that it should be able to handle. That's the only gripe I have with like the Delica. It's awesome knives and stuff, but you certainly wouldn't be using that in any kind of defensive role. It's just too flimsy, in my opinion.
Right. And that's, I kind of want to get more into the technical aspect here, and this is, Huck, I'm going to depend on you to kind of to guide me. I have been watching a lot of knife makers, knife making videos and documentaries, because I don't know why, but I've found myself being really drawn towards knives here lately, and so for someone out there that's looking to purchase we'll just start with folders. Folding knives first. What would your recommendation be for a the type of steel used in a folding knife? Something that's going to give you a good edge retention and
Well,
also durability.
that's kind of a trick question because as a knife maker, that's not how it works. You recommend a brand or a maker, not a type of steel. A type of steel can be made wrong. A type of steel can be tempered wrong. So, like, whereas Frost Cutlery uses 440 for all their cheap knives, just as an example, the Buck 110 does as well, and the Buck 110 has been one of the proven sharpest knives and longest lasting edges on the market.
Right, great point.
So it's all about who you recommend rather than what you recommend, because almost every company offers multiple steels nowadays, in different types of knives, or even sometimes the same types of knives in multiple types of steel. So
Okay, well,
usually the very first two things on my list are always buck and cold steel, because they've been the most standard production quality knives that I've ever seen since the 80s. Since I've been watching, buck knives and cold steel have been top of the line, and to this day, neither one of them has declined to the point where Gerber and SOG and most of those knives have.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a good point because there again, that's something I wouldn't have thought of, and that's well, just like I said, I've been watching these videos, and depending on how you temper it or harden it, the heat treating um, is going to determine how your blade comes out, and
Yep.
so that's yeah. So now as far as so those are going to be more of your production buck and cold steel. Let's call those the commercial blade companies, if you will. Um, is there any other than yourself? Obviously, is there any I guess boutique or custom knife companies that you could recommend right off the bat?
Oh yeah, off the top of my head, a guy that came up with me, Matt Martin over at Vehement Knives, makes some fantastic like duty knives. He makes high quality. He makes EOD knives and military service knives. Very, very, very top quality stuff. And he's got like a 6-month back order, so that tells you a little bit about his quality right there. Draven Industries makes some really wild, wicked, like tactical, but more wicked artistic knives. It makes some fantastic stuff. Um, Off the top of my head, another really good one is Rodney Hill Handmade Knives. I believe that's his Facebook page name. He makes some fantastic work. Ecos Knives is another fantastic. They do a lot of Japanese stuff. I could go on for hours, but
Yeah, and I'll throw in Emerson. Emerson's good stuff. Ravencrest Tactical, they're putting out some good stuff. The Monkey Edge. I mean, I was shocked at how many in here. I'm looking at, let's see, just this directory here for the knife show. There is, or for Blade Show rather, 320 different knife manufacturers just listed at Blade Show in this catalog. So it's amazing to me how many how many different designs, how many different companies and knife makers, using new techniques and materials. The folded, some people call it, what do they call it? Pattern welded or Damascus. What's that Walter Sorrells guy? What's he say there, Huck?
it's yeah. Damascus is kind of a misnomer because that was the type of steel made in Damascus, the town or the city. But it's really pattern welded. It's really just folded steel.
Right, folded steel, pattern welded. And just real quick for any of you guys that might not know, what they basically do is they take, like a nickel steel and then another type of steel, usually 2 or 3 different types of steel, and it's all stacked and welded. It's put in a in a furnace, heated up, drawn out, pounded, folded, and so you get all these different layers built up. Um, and then once you have your billet made and you cut your blade out of your billet, then the different layers of steel, I guess, will show up when you etch it, because like the etching will take on some steel and not other steel, and that's what gives you that wavy pattern that you are familiar with when you say
And
Damascus.
the layers are that thin that's how that can work, huh? As well, that it's going through it right on the surface there.
Well, yeah, when you
So
fold,
many layers.
if you were to take a piece of steel and fold it over once, just imagine a bar of one kind of steel, even if you don't mix other softer steels into it or anything. You fold it over once, that's 2 layers. Fold it over twice, that's 4 layers, not 3 layers.
Right
So
then.
every time you fold it, it doubles.
60.
So those layers, a knife that's folded 500 times is going to be an
Ugh.
amount of layers. I
Right.
mean,
Just keeps on multiplying. Okay. Yep.
so and they are paper thin. You can have what's called a lamination or delamination, where they'll separate, and the pieces that come off, you can crumble them in your hands. They're so thin.
Yep.
Right.
And the acid actually eats. So like Stowe Guy was saying, the acid will eat away the softer steels and leave the harder stuff, and you'll get that multiple texture, the multiple different layers. Look.
Well, now, and is it part of the reason for that desirability is? Did you mention once? I thought that you could get a Damascus slightly sharper because it has thinner layers, or is that a misnomer?
Yeah, it's really what it was designed to purify impure steel, and a way to make a steel that we can make now just from scratch.
Okay.
So it is. I mean, nowadays, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know this, but it's really a beauty thing these days. It's done to be a beautiful steel because it can be controlled and made into a good solid knife, but a knife that was made, on a structural level, one piece at a time, rather than made of something that already existed, is just going to be more controllable.
Would it be fair to say that someone knowing what they're doing can make an unbelievable Damascus blade now even better than ever because of the technology and what we have available?
Oh yeah, they do. They do.
Yeah.
Some of the stuff these guys are doing. I mean, they're controlling the lines in the steel to make different designs.
Awesome.
And that's absolutely amazing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you guys are interested, there's one guy on the YouTube called Walter Sorrells. He does some great videos on how to make Damascus or pattern welded steel. And then there's another guy, I can't, fuck is this, Carter. What's it, Carter's, what the hell is his name? You know what I'm talking about, Huck? I think his last name's Carter.
I don't know. I just thought of another one. Eric over at Widowmaker Knives makes some fantastic knives. That's another good custom maker.
And here's the thing is, I think everybody that gets into knives, I mean, you can go to your local sports shops or gun stores and buy your Bucks or your Cold Steel, your Spyderco, your Benchmades, for, anywhere from $50 to $150, and they're good knives. But the thing I think that I can appreciate now is the fact that knives that were $300 and $400 and $500, like I had, anytime I'd seen those, previous to me really researching this, I was like, there's no way in hell that I'd spend that much money on a knife. That's retarded. That knife is not worth that much money. But then after, really paying attention to not only the quality and the craftsmanship, I mean, you are paying a little premium for the labor and the knowledge of that knife maker, but really you can tell the difference in the quality of steel and how it's heat treated and tempered, and all the different things that go into making a quality knife that is going to be $300 or $400 versus a stock cold steel production knife.
Well, and it's hard to transfer into words or into pictures too. It's something I've fought. My dad fought. Every knife maker I know fights. You cannot appreciate it until you hold it in your hand next to a Taiwanese mass-produced Rambo knife. There is no way to see or imagine the value that goes into these until you've handled one and really, like you said, understand what goes into it and what these guys go through making them.
So elaborate on. Let me see if I can word this right. So obviously, there are very expensive knives out there that, like you said, you can appreciate, and of course they're going to fit well, and they're going to cut well, and they're going to be durable, and hopefully hold edges longer. But where does the line get drawn between what a good $70 knife, how that can operate? Again, I know it's all more like an art type of thing, but is there another advantage having that super high-end knife? Yeah.
The $70 isn't even going to get you a close to custom value knife. I mean, the amount of work and precision and years of trial and error that goes into a custom knife you're getting a knife that's worth $7,000 or $8,000 when you're buying one of my $300 knives. I mean,
Yes.
there's no way to put a price on the amount of experience that goes into a good custom knife.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody hand forges something, you're going into a totally different ballgame because there is no room for error in a handmade knife. There's room for error in a production knife. Even a $300 production knife, there's still room for error until you get to the point of I think Wilson Combat where they hand assemble every gun. One guy starts the gun, one guy finishes the gun. That's what you're getting.
Because there's a law of diminishing returns at some point, especially with firearms. When you talk,
That's kind of what I was kind of asking.
When you get
where's the line of from $300 and over, like again, you're saying I know they understand with the experience part of it.
Now let me ask you this, Huck. As far as because I've seen a lot of guys that are just taking stock like a 1090 steel or a 30 SV steel or something and just cutting blanks and shaping a knife, something like that versus a pattern welded or even just a forge welded, of the same steel. Are you going to get a stronger, more durable blade if you forge?
Here's the thing.
It versus cutting it out of a blank, or
if you're talking about 1095 bar stock, you're going to get a better blade if you have a good blacksmith forging it. It's really what comes down to is the amount of skill that the blacksmith has, how good he is at counting, and stuff like that. Because it's what you do when you hammer a knife is compress the steel. You change the actual structure of it because you're heating it up to critical temperatures right before melting point and shaping with a hammer. So if you're not doing that perfectly, what you get is an inconsistent knife. It's got different hardnesses, different densities in different parts of the blades, and so on. If you do it right, you have a perfectly hardened knife or a perfectly aligned knife before you harden it. And you can get steels today that are good quality. I use antique files because I know what kind of steel, I know what the structure of that steel is, I know how it's going to act, I know what I can do to it, and what it's going to be like when I'm done with it. Like, for example, the knife you have. I've made quite a few of those over the years, and I've never had one chipped blade, I've never had one knife returned, and everyone that has one has a lifetime guarantee. Every knife I put out has an unconditional lifetime guarantee. So,
that's the Nicholson file knife.
Yep.
Yeah, and I've been watching a lot of guys that had actually recommended not only the Nicholson for the file to actually shape their bar stock knives, but then to make a file knife, they said that Nicholson is usually some good steel in the first place.
Yep, it's harder than any regular knife steel you have, unless you have something ridiculous. And its structure, its microstructure is again, perfectly aligned. It's already made to a perfect crystalline structure. All you have to
So-
do is to not mess it up while you're grinding it and doing your work to it.
So as long as
So
you don't get it too hot.
So you didn't have to heat treat or temper that blade. It's
Oh
already.
no, tempering is actually when you bring the steel down to a lower, like you're relaxing it essentially.
Right.
So yes, I do that to every file knife. I temper down to a certain HRC, which I know by color just by doing it for so long.
Right.
With the same materials. But yeah, I do heat treat them. A lot of guys when they do it will get the knife red hot, as white hot as it can get, and then they let it air cool or sand cool or something, and that's called normalizing. That makes the knife soft as butter. So then you can grind your blade out real easy and quick and don't have to worry about overheating or anything because you're going to reharden the knife later and then temper the knife down. I cold cut my knives because I prefer not altering the structure of the steel with heat until I have to.
And then your product's finished when you're done.
Exactly, and then I
Let
don't
me
have
ask you
to
this:
do...
obviously, you've always talked about how a bad heat treats the death of a knife. Can a knife get heat treated to the right level, and then if someone tries to reheat it or doesn't get it up to temperature again, is that gonna
Absolutely.
any heat that's above a certain level is gonna alter that structure, isn't it?
Yeah, it was. I don't remember who it was when I first joined YouTube. I was either a good guy's knife, somebody's knife. I was making one of the very first lines of it, and I overheated it, turned it purple, and that was it. The knife is trash at that point. And it was all done. I mean, almost for essentially done besides handles and stuff. And I had to start from scratch, make a new knife, and temper it properly.
So that piece of steel would then no longer be usable.
Well, I can reuse it. I just you can only heat and reheat and hammer them so many times. I mean.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting.
Now, as far as the technical term, what do you call that little line?
The blood groove?
No. At the base, where your blade comes into the handle, there's generally a little line.
Ricasso or the choil.
The ricasso, yeah. The ricasso is explain the ricasso, and then the choil isn't that the little groove, like the little half moon thing?
Okay, so a ricasso, I'll just pull out a knife here. I don't think I have. The ricasso is one of the making or breaking points as a knife maker. Let me get some better light up here. This line right here is what he's talking about, and that is the sign of a knife maker when they pay attention to that. I've done some knives. I do some what's called a swept or a angled ricasso, which is just it just kind of bleeds up into this flat here and so there's no line. It's just kind of a swoop, and that's simply because of the tools I use. It's very, very, very critical. I mean, as far as the structure of your knife, because here you can tell the distances from the center of the blade to the edge of this flat will tell you where your knife's sitting. So you can use that as a judging point for the rest of your blade when you're looking down it. It's also the strongest point on your blade because it's full thickness. So, and then the choil would be a little tiny groove cut into the actual cutting edge right here, or even into the little metal right here. But I'm not a huge fan of those. I've never really seen the use for them or anything.
No. I've heard a few places. I don't find it particularly useful, but what I've heard is that it makes sharpening some knives easier. I'm guessing that they're using either some sort of electronic sharpener to do it.
Well, it gives you a spot where the blade ends,
Exactly.
so that you can finish sharpening. Or otherwise it would continue into the handle or into your.
I'm down for the person who owns a knife to be able to resharpen it.
Yeah, that's another thing I do. Most of my knives are dull. I don't know if you guys will see it, but this is flat, that first half an inch or so. And I don't like a choil, but I do like having that spot where my sharpening ends. That's, like Stone Guy said, it gives you a good starting point.
Mm-hmm.
So for a fixed blade knife, what would you consider the best choice? Let's say for a bushcraft, something that you may feather a stick with, or
You mean like what? Just production? What would I suggest to people?
Well, not just production, but as far as maybe the length of the blade and or the width? Like, would you
Okay.
do you know what I'm saying?
If you had to have one knife, and if you had to, whether it was bushcrafting, if anything, if you only had one knife, I would suggest everyone get a Bowie knife. And I'm talking Bowie knife as in over 10 inches, something with a decent cross guard on it that you're not gonna, even when you're exhausted, you're not gonna slip up onto your blade or have any troubles there. You're not gonna be getting hit by stuff when you're doing heavy cutting. At least an inch and a half wide blade, so you get the extra force and weight behind your cuts, and you also have more cutting surface. And that's, I mean, that's all the criteria. Full tang is not really a necessary thing these days. It never really was, but it's a kind of a desirable thing. And that's the full tang is the steel running from the blade and all the way through the handle.
Oh, now that's a good point, because it seems like that is kind of a prerequisite and a sticking point to some people that almost use the tang as a method of telling, you know, how nice the knife is. They're like, oh, that doesn't have a full tang.
Yeah, like they discount
That's
the whole
a total
knife
myth,
because of
man.
that.
That's myth. That's utter myth. I bought a $20 ninja sword that had a full tang. So,
So what you're saying is full tang could also be a piece of crap.
yeah. Full tang just means that there's steel all the way around. It means it's a design. It's like saying compact or subcompact. It's just a design. Hidden tang knives. Some of the best knives in the world are hidden tang knives. Like the ultimate knives have a tang. The Gerber Mark II, one of the most famous combat knives of all time, has a tang about an inch, maybe an inch and a half long, that's glued into the handle. It's not even pinned. So it's really just a matter of what you're doing with the knife. With a Bowie, though, I generally suggest it. It's hard to get a good hidden tang these days, unless you're going to a high-dollar custom knife.
Well, am I maybe mistaken? This may just be on the modern production, but I know I've had a couple of the K-bar, and that's basically just a rod. That's
it's a hidden, a rat tail or a hidden tang. Yeah.
Right. So I can't believe that, you know, because it's durable. I mean, those things have been literally through wars. And
this is a Western U.S. issue Bowie knife. This was a Vietnam Special Forces knife. And you can see the tang's 3-inch by 1-inch with a couple pinholes. The only one or two of these would have been pinned. And that was a knife that they gave our special ops guys to survive the jungle with. And so again, it's just a matter of how the knife's designed. If the handle's right, if it's glued right, it's going to be a solid knife.
And the materials that are used to make the handle are important too.
A Japanese knife, a Japanese katana, anything like that, are made with an encapsulated tang, where it's the same thing. It's a hidden tang. It just goes in here a certain distance, and then there's a piece of bamboo about the size of a chopstick that holds it in place. That's the pin that holds any handmade samurai sword together. I use brass just because it seems safer to me, but you rarely hear of someone's sword falling apart. But again, that's the samurai. Everyone knows how legendary the samurai were. Their swords were one to two pins holding them together. It's really all about a matter of design. On a Buck 110, this hole right here, this is a Buck 110 without handles on it. This hole right here, that size pin is what holds the whole knife together. All these other pins just hold the handles on. And of course, there's a blade pivot pin. Of course, every folder has a blade pivot pin. And but this is the thing that holds all the mechanics in. This is what holds the lock in. It's what holds the spring in, and what makes the knife work. So that's a very, very small little piece of material holding it together. But by design, it works very well.
Well, that's cool. So, okay, so Bowie knife, pretty much universal, get you by any bushcraft / camping, hiking.
Yep, absolutely. As long as it's got a good long, good wide blade, you'll be able to do anything that a mountain man did, and they did a lot.
Now, what's the theory behind like a fillet knife with the, you know, and I guess we can get into the different angles of the groove when you talk about cutting. Obviously, the thinner the knife, maybe the more precise the cut. But then, you know, I've heard conflicting thought processes on that, you know?
The real theory behind a fillet knife, and it was actually perfected by sushi chefs, which don't use fillet knives. They use what's called a santoku knife. Um, the theory is that you want as little steel touching, you want as little friction on the fish as possible when you're cutting it, so it doesn't degrade. As soon as you cut fish, it starts rotting essentially. And the less damage you do to the surface, the sharper your knife, the thinner it is, the less it's going to touch, the less friction it's going to make, the less surface area it's going to have, in contact with the actual meat. Um, a Santoku knife is kind of hard to explain. Those are basically, instead of being angled on both sides like this Bowie knife here, they're dished inwards on one side, and on the other side they're angled really sharply. So a fillet knife, it's especially for fish. I mean, you want to degrade the fish as little as possible, so the fillets last as long as possible and degrade as little as possible.
So now, talk a little bit about the angle. I've heard you talk about a zero grind and a beveled grind and that kind of stuff. Does that, when you think about the angle of a blade, you think of a V shape in essence. As that, as that goes through, we'll just say flesh or meat, like think about cutting a steak. Is there a more what's that word? Like like the best design to push through that meat to allow the blade to, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'll try to figure out how to describe it.
Preferred design?
Yeah, like as far as, like a V shape, when you go to cut through something, if the V is too wide, you're going to lose the cutting surface, right? You're only going to see.
Okay, so I'm a terrible artist. I don't draw very well, but here's some basic simple. If you imagine a knife that I just broke in half, this would be looking at the end of it. So I don't know how much definition you guys can see. This is your general knife shape. It's flat sides, and then it angles down, and then there's a little sharp edge at the edge. Your fillet knife is going to be shaped like this. There's going to be one continuous angle from the spine of the knife to the cutting edge of the knife, and it's going to be very, very thin and very sharp the whole way. There's going to be no rounded to it. Like this one here has a little bit of rounding. That's a convex edge. That's more of a like a tool, more of a chopping, going to get beat to hell knife that you don't want the edge to be damaged on. This would be a zero grind. I mean, under the basic, zero grind is kind of a misnomer too, but a flat grind is just one single angle all the way with varying thicknesses on the spine. So the thing with the geometry, it's really, really, really all about what you're doing with it. Samurai swords were designed with what's essentially a zero grind. Where'd I put it? Meaning that as soon as the angle starts, it doesn't stop until it reaches the cutting edge. Most pocket knives have an angle, and then they come down to an edge. Let's see if I can get it to shine, but an edge, there you go. That's sharpened. That's where the sharpening happens. When you sharpen a flat grind or a zero grind knife, you literally sharpen this whole flat at once. There's no edge that you sharpen. So you're laying the whole flat piece of steel and you're drawing it this way on your nose. So again, these were designed for cutting through light bamboo and people. So they don't have a lot of strength. The edges are very commonly chipped and dented and folded over. It's super common. Whereas something like a buck knife is a hollow grind. And most production knives you will find will be hollow grind. That's actually a convex on either side. So your edges are essentially doing that. They kind of dish inwards here. And then they get a little beefier. So at the top, and then they're actually sharpened. So that's the most utilitarian. That's the most common because of the way how easy they are to sharpen, how easy they are to use, and how resilient they are to damage. The hollow grind.
Okay, so that's what I guess that's what I was getting at. Because if you've got a sharp, the actual cutting edge is real sharp, but then the rest of your blade is fatter, when you go to push a knife through something, you're going to have more friction if you have that fatter angle, and
Exactly.
the blade's going to want to stop.
Yeah, because if you took that rounded edge and flattened it out, it would be longer than the edge that was just flat. Um, your knife stone guy, for example, is a convex. It's got rounded like that, but it's ground very thin. So it's a thin convex. It's a really resilient edge that's still going to be able to cut pretty well. But if you try to cut a steak with it, or if you're trying to, fillet fish with it, it's already, it's a wide utilitarian blade. It's not a precision whittling blade or anything.
Right, yeah. So and I think that's the thing, that most people just think a knife is a knife is a knife, and don't realize that, I think that, just like everything else, if you got a pair of needle nose pliers, you got a pair of, what's the other, just regular, fuck do they call the other pliers? Just the regular pliers?
Channel locks, pliers,
channel locks, and
side snips.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
bullnose.
Well, you wouldn't
Bullnose,
own
that's
just
the word I
one
was
gun.
looking for.
I mean,
That's
if
the
you
one I
had
was
to pick if you only were allowed to have so many guns, you wouldn't just pick one pistol. You would pick a pistol and a rifle, or pistol, rifle, shotgun, whatever your preference is, whatever jobs you need to get done.
He'd take a
Yeah.
G19.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I remember at Blade Show, because I ended up buying a couple knives there, and from the different people I went and spoke with, and I'd say, hey, I'm looking for a knife, and they'd be like, well, what are you going to do with it? What do you need it for? And that was pretty much a common response, or like the first question I got from all those guys was, what's your intended purpose? And they would steer me in the right direction depending on my answer. And so that was really, was something I had never taken into consideration before, because it was, a knife is a knife. Well,
Yep, I do the same thing on Facebook every day. Well, not every day, at least twice, 3 times a week at very minimum. Someone will be like, all right, I want a knife. I need a knife for this. And I'll tell them, go buy a cold steel. Go buy a buck. You do not want my knives for this. Or you want this kind of knife for this. I'll tell them exactly what design they want. And what I think would work best for their purposes. It's all that you'll find that with most knife makers. They don't want to just sell you a knife. They want you to get the job done. So.
Yeah, which I think is, which is kind of cool, especially someone like yourself that's got a vested interest in selling a knife. I mean, that's what you do for a living, but for you to be professional enough to understand that, there's, a knife out there that you could, that would do what they want without, wasting money or time and effort. That's pretty cool of you to do that.
Absolutely. I send orders, and that's another cool thing about knife makers in general. We're doing it because we love knives, and we love what they do, we love what they mean, and it happens all the time. People send me customers, I send people customers. It was for the whole time my dad was making knives, he was the only maker that Chuck Buck, at the time the owner of Buck Knives, allowed to tool the spines and the backs of the blades of his knives and still carried a full lifetime guarantee. That was something that no other knife maker had from Buck, or no other company would let you customize their knife or work on their knife and still hold their guarantee. And it's gotten to the point where knife makers are such a good community, such a good brotherhood, that they're pretty much everybody's working together. Everybody's doing compilation pieces and all kinds of cool stuff like that. Even big companies, little companies. Ken Onion was a guy like me. He started in his garage. Now he's one of Kershaw's best designers.
Right, I do have one of his Ken Onion design knives too.
I consider the Kershaw Blur to be one of the finest EDC pocket knives ever.
Well, he was, as a matter of fact, the Blade Show this year, it was a Ken Onion design that was Blade Show's, I guess, commemorative knife. It was a Ken Onion design, and then they had etched or engraved Blade Show 2014 yada yada on this knife, and it was selling for $50. It was, like I said, more of a commemorative piece, but
Awesome.
I thought that was cool. Um, so as far as swords, you know, you go to gun shows and you see these, what they're calling katana swords that are 30 and 40 bucks, 60 bucks.
The fake Anna.
Yeah. As far as a sword goes, does a sword have to be folded
No.
forged steel, or can you make a sword out of a blank and it be quality?
I don't know. That's rough. There are guys that have made swords out of and axes and all kinds of crazy stuff out of giant saw blades, and that's just essentially just cutting out a shape. I personally believe a sword should be forged. The length that they are, the types of stresses that they endure when cutting or not cutting, as most of the time it happens, they need to be forged. They don't need to be folded necessarily. Again, the technologies we have, the types of steel we use today. One of my favorite makers uses Swedish powdered steel, and he makes Japanese-style swords, mostly Japanese-style swords, out of China. And they start off at about $100 and move up to the thousands. And that's Paul Chen or Hanwei, the Hanwei Forge in Dalian, China. But they make fantastic blades all the way up the line. Their $100 blades are way worth $100 and not worth $300, but he has $300 blades. They have a series of folded swords, just using this company as an example, but they're priced accordingly. They're made as decorative pieces, not necessarily decorative, but more decorative pieces. But there's honestly, I think the limit these days, you cannot get a decent sword for under $100. I'm not aware of one, at least.
Oh, anybody else got any questions or thoughts, ideas?
How hard is it to sharpen a big katana?
Well, they get about $200 to $300 an inch for the cheap ones.
Just to sharpen one?
Yeah, well, sharpening, again, you have to work that whole edge, and usually they work the whole blade, the flat and the edge, and it takes quite a lot of dedication, time, and knowledge to do. I've made katanas from scratch, and I would not take an order to sharpen one, a high quality one. I would not accept it, just because of the amount of skill it takes to perfect it.
See, I don't want to try to do it myself because I don't want to screw it up.
Well, that brings up a good point as far as sharpening. What's everybody knows Arkansas stones or the little sticks, the white sticks that are set up like a V.
The spider goes
The ceramic,
I mean,
ceramic rods.
I've heard, what is it? What was it? 20
Work sharp?
23, was it a 23-degree angle or
Depends
32?
on your knife. Depends on your knife, and it depends on the types of angle your knife already has.
And what you're going to use the knife for.
Exactly. I've seen people. Let me get my camera on here again. I've seen people take a buck 110, like this one I have here, which to be razor hair splitting sharp, they only need this tiny little angle to make them sharp. I've seen people draw that angle up to the bottom of my finger here, so it was halfway up the blade, because they were using the knife to fillet stuff, and they needed to cut super, super quick, super, super clean. And I've seen people take, and as soon as they get a buck knife home, they take them and round them off on a stone, taking all the edge off of it, because they're going to be using it to cut, blocks loose of their saran wrap or whatever. So it's really what you're going to do with the knife. And honestly, as far as what tool to use, it's what works best for you. I suggest everyone learn to do it on a stone, because if you can learn to do it on an Arkansas stone, you can eventually learn to do it on a river rock that you pick up while you're hiking. And that's an invaluable skill.
Yep, and it takes a lot of practice too. It's not something you're going to get right off the bat. I always relied on a machine to sharpen my knives, and then talking with Huck, I started doing it by hand. And I learned on inexpensive knives at first, and then I can sharpen any of my knives now by hand almost as fast as I could with a machine, but I get a better edge.
By the time I'm done working on a knife, whether I've made it or not, just by the types of things I do to it, all I have to do is touch it to a stone 2 or 3 times on either side, and it's sharp. Just because I know angles, I know how they become what they are and how to get them there. But to this day, you can hand me your knife that you carried and made a little bit dull, and I can start working it and get it razor sharp, and then 2 strokes later on the stone, it'll be dull as all hell. You won't even be able to cut paper with it, and or rope with it. So and I've been making knives for a long time. I started, the very first thing I ever customized was a ninja sword when I was about 10 years old. We took a file and gave it a tanto tip, and that's, I've been making stuff since then, customizing. I've never had a gun or a knife or anything that I didn't customize. So all it takes is experience and lots of failure.
Yeah.
Now, is there one sharpening system out there on the commercial market that you could recommend for someone starting out that wants to be able to maintain their knives but doesn't have the time or the dedication to learn proper techniques?
There's a lot of. The problem with sharpening systems is you have to try each one. I hear a lot of good things about Wicked Sharp. I've never heard somebody complain about their system. The Work Sharp is something that people have been using a lot these days. I think Cork has one of those. I was getting one of those. And they supposedly are working pretty fantastic for people. Those V sharpeners, it's a little wooden base with 2 ceramic. They're about a little bit thicker than a pencil, 2 ceramic rods that click into the thing at 2 different V angles, or one V angle. Those are great if you can get them to work. If you can hold the knife properly and give it the proper amount of strokes or strokes.
Hey Huck, what do you think about the Lansky sharpener?
Lansky tools are awesome. I've never mastered the use of them, but I've seen guys take a butter knife and make them, hair whittling sharp with them. So
I'm gonna say one thing about Lansky is their rods will bend easily if you keep them clicked in place in their kits. So when you get them, take the rods out of there very carefully and keep them out of there.
That's
in there.
A good point about any sharpening thing you have. Be very, very careful with it. Don't drop your knife in it. Don't let your knife click when you touch it. Make sure you softly touch it to it. That'll preserve your knife and it'll preserve your tool. Every sharpening tool is delicate. There is not one made that isn't delicate.
Yep. And there are, for me, I've been practicing, and I've talked about this before, but a lot of fish tank heaters have a ceramic stone or rod in there. And if you happen to have one, you can actually use that instead of spending all that money. But again, you have to be practiced by doing it by hand. They work really well.
I've found, in fact, here, I'll put my camera on again. This is my sharpening drawer. This is most of the files and stuff I use for making edges, not honing them. I found tools like this. It's carbide on one side, ceramic on the other. And this one specifically sucks, but I have bought these that work wonders. The angles on them were just perfect. You run it through the carbide and it peels off any excess steel that's improperly angled, and then you run it through the ceramic and it sharpens it, makes it nice and clean, no burrs on the edge. And this one, again, this is the exact same brand, the exact same size as the one that was awesome. It's a Smith's, and this one happens to suck because the angles aren't exactly perfect on it. But this one here, I don't even know what brand this is. It doesn't have a brand name on it. This is just 2 carbide teeth for kitchen knives, and it works wonders. I've used this on pretty much every kitchen knife I've owned for the last 5 years or so, and they're all hair whittle and sharp. Also, I run them on a sharpening hone, but that's because I'm a cook.
The importance of stropping your knife when you're actually done on the stones.
Yep, there's the next thing I was going to get to. Shit. Well, you're going to have to give me a minute because I just dumped my box of stones.
Well, while we're waiting on him to clean up his shit, there's someone just asked from YouTube if we know of any a good company for replica swords and, like maybe Civil War replicas or reproductions.
Paul Chen. The Hanwei, Paul Chen, CAS Iberia is the company I was talking about earlier. They make everything from Roman to Civil War to Japanese, everything you could want. Fantastic company.
All right, there you go.
Yeah, I haven't looked to see if Cold Steel did anything like that, but Cold Steel makes some decent swords too. A little more money, but
Yeah, I haven't seen any replicas in any of their catalogs and stuff. And that's the other Cold Steel. While we're at it,
catalog.
if you just call Cold Steel and get their catalog, they actually send you a CDs now that are or DVDs rather
DVDs, yep.
that are awesome, man. Just really awesome stuff.
They're like
Um,
all their YouTube videos on DVD, and they're awesome.
yeah, yeah, you could literally sit there for hours and watch watch
And
them fucking cut up pigs and
yeah,
shit.
I will say something else too. You don't have to call them. You can actually fill out a form online, and they'll send you a catalog. Just be prepared to wait because it will take 6 to 8 weeks.
So stropping, is that typically only done with leather, or can you use other materials to strop a blade?
Well, that was
Oh,
what I was grabbing my damn box for when I tore the edge of it and dumped all my stones. So this is my box of sharpening stones. I've collected quite a few. I don't want to tip it too much. Quite a few over the years. There's probably 15 in here. 10, 15 different sizes. I use this one, which is an Arkansas super fine. I think it's like a 3,000 grit, maybe 4,000 grit. I can't remember what their system is. And then I use a block of wood. And that's my strop, is a block of wood. So leather is an awesome strop. It has its properties, and it has its ups and downs, just like wood does. But you can pretty much strop with anything finer than what you sharpen with.
And on the leather, is the suede side or the smooth side, or
suede.
better smooth?
Yeah, you want to do the smooth side, unless you can, unless you have like some people will cover the rough side with buffing compound and use that side as a sharpener, and then the other side as a honer because it's finer.
Because I have an old leather belt that seems to work pretty well for that, but I never knew which side was best.
Well,
And so,
yeah,
I was going to say real quick.
compound Huck was talking about, it's like a green color. It's comes either in a bar or in a stick, and you just a little bit of heat, and you can rub it and then put it on, or you can just get more time. You can actually just create the friction and get it to stick to the belt too.
So the suede side can actually take metal off and sharpen it?
Well, yeah, it's just rougher. When you add compound to it, it starts taking a lot more metal off. Because you've got the peaks and valleys and so on.
So explain to people that don't know what stropping is.
Stropping is when you sharpen a knife, it's not called an edge, it's called a burr, because what it is a very rough, like micro serrations and hooks and grooves and chips in the edge of your blade, and it's microscopic. Like you cannot see it until you're under a microscope. And when you strop a blade, you're basically removing and smoothing the edges, making it more like a razor or a scalpel. Because you'll sometimes notice your knife feels really, really sharp, and then you cut one or two things with it and it feels dull. That's because whatever you cut removed the micro serrations, it gathered them and smoothed them out to clean out your edge, and that's stropping. Or you can do the same thing with a buffing wheel if you know how to do it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if that was just buffing, more or less.
Yeah, it's polishing. It's essentially polishing your edge.
And just because this is something Huck taught me too, you can actually strap a knife on a rolled up piece of paper.
Yep, or like a piece of paper wrapped around a good flat piece of wood or something. Whatever you got. I prefer rods to sharpen on.
Yeah, but if you're going to strap, you want to see if you're actually doing something that way. You can with the white piece of paper. It's really cool.
Yeah, you'll leave black streaks as the steel's removed.
Yep. So you can actually see if you're actually working, and that really did teach me how to control my angles a lot better too, because I could actually see when I was going too deep or too shallow. So I looked at it as an excellent teaching tool too.
I know a few guys that the last two steps they do when they finish making a knife is they'll sharpen it on a piece of cardboard, and then they'll sharpen it on a piece of paper, and then they'll cut real quick a few slices off the piece of paper, and that's the last thing they do before they ship it. The very last thing I do with the knife before I ship it is rub the blade down with a I have a polishing cloth that's got a dry. It's like a jewelry polishing cloth, and I wipe the blades down with those.
Now, another thing, the importance of keeping a knife sharp, and I just want to say this: a sharp knife is a safe knife.
Yep,
Seems
you don't
weird
have
to
to
say
fight
that.
it.
Yeah, but I mean, it's less effort you're gonna have to use to cut something. So, give you a good example in the kitchen. You're sitting there having to cut that tomato, and you're having trouble getting the knife through there. You're more likely to slip with that knife and then cut your finger.
Yep, you have less slicing motion. You have to go back and forth less times. So there's less movement involved, less chance of mechanical failure. You don't have to tear through things. A dull knife will tear through a piece of paper, whereas a sharp knife will just whip right through it and make a clean cut. So there's less likely you're going to go off track when you're going to cut the wrong area. And it's also, again, it's just you're not fighting it. You don't have to struggle. There's no unexpected anything happening. The knife's just going to cut right through whatever you're cutting.
Hey, Huck, I have a bunch of Hinkle kitchen knives, and I tried to sharpen with my Lansky, and it made the edge worse, I thought. Arkansas Stone, just try that with it and quit using that other stuff, or what do you think?
Yeah, keep in mind kitchen knives have a very, very, very fine edge. They're almost a zero edge. They're very, very tricky to sharpen. It's one of the hardest knives to sharpen, next to like a sushi knife or something.
Yeah, I found that out.
Yep, those are nice knives, by the way.
Thank you.
I found with my kitchen knives, when I use that's what I use my work sharp for, is kitchen knives. Because I find it's the fastest because of such a shallow angle that you have on there. You can't use any of the guides, so you're almost rubbing that whole side of the blade against the belt, and you got to be really careful. But I find that's the fastest way for my kitchen knives, so I love it for my kitchen knives.
Yeah, that's a good way to explain. Is you're practically, when you're sharpening on a stone or something, you're practically rubbing the whole blade on the stone.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Now,
Well, I was going to say that's the reason why the Lansky is probably not working for you. It's too sharp of an angle. It's not.
It might
not
be.
gonna
I mean, I
line up.
used the angle they said.
It's
I used the angle they
17.
said, so that's part of the problem.
Yeah, I think 17 is a minimum angle on that little system, if I remember correctly.
Okay.
Now, what about oiling a knife? How necessary is it to keep your blades oiled?
Well, if you have a high carbon blade with no kind of coating or anything on it, no acid treatment, like every knife I put out, I do an acid coating, essentially, similar to like a Glock's Tenefer. It gets into the steel, it kind of eats into the steel, and rust can't take hold from that. If you have just a plain carbon knife, you can oil it with olive oil or canola oil, and it will keep from rusting. WD-40 will do it. Any kind of oil to keep moisture from sinking into that steel, because steel is porous.
Yes, and that's a good thing you said that olive oil, or a food grade oil, especially if you're using it on kitchen knives that are carbon steel. Very important. You don't want to sit there and use the same stuff you use to lube up your gun on your knife that you can use for food prep. And
Exactly.
and if you're worried about a knife developing a patina if it's carbon steel, either you have to keep it really well oiled, or you can force a patina that's gonna. It's kind of like bluing a gun. You're creating a bluing on the steel. And that's done very easily with hot vinegar.
Acid of any kind. That's what I was saying. Acid is like my favorite treatment for a carbon. You can do it with mustard. You can do it with all kinds of stuff. Pretty much anything with. I think Coca-Cola might even do it. I've never tried.
No, the reason I like the vinegar because it's inexpensive and you can just boil it in your pot and kitchen and just don't inhale the fumes because it really stings. But I learned that the hard way. I've actually patinaed a couple of, one is a Morin, one's a Opinel knife, just because I didn't want them to rust.
All right. Well, anybody else got anything they want to talk about knives? We've been going a little over an hour, so.
I'm just disappointed because I was going to try to send my sword to Huck.
Sorry, katana's a rough.
Yeah, I just got a new one. It was like 400, 450, something like that. But it's kind of dull.
What brand or what kind?
Chenis, something like that. It's
yeah.
9260.
Yes, man. They make some fantastic blades.
Fuck, for $500, I'd send that thing back to them and tell them to sharpen it.
Yep.
They
I
will.
can't remember what Cold Steel's policy on sharpening a knife is, but if you buy like Cold Steel, I know they have a policy for sharpening knives.
Yeah, I got to get its match. The not the Wakasachi, the next smaller one. I think they call it a Ko Katana. That's next on my list. It's lonely out there all by itself.
Yep. Stop buying Legos and buy yourself more swords.
I can't. Somebody made me do it. But that's really, I was going to box that thing up and just send it to you one of these days.
Hey, he told you it's $200 to $300 an inch.
God, I'd buy another Barrett for that.
What kind of polish? Is it a high polish or?
I'm not really sure. I'll send you a link to the one. Well, wait, I don't know if it'd take me a minute to find it.
Yeah, no worry.
It's not very shiny. It's like a matte kind of finish. And it doesn't have a fuller.
Just for you, Wesley. Don't want anybody getting the wrong idea out there.
All right. Oh, well, real quick, Moons asked if you can polish. Oh, okay, you answered that. Never mind. Well, cool, man. That was awesome. I think that was we definitely stayed on topic with that. That was pretty cool.
Oh yeah, we're hoping. G-Webs and me were talking. We're hoping to do a few more of these kind of more regularly. I got some knife maker friends I want to get in on it.
Right. That's what I was about to say. So this was just kind of a prelude to upcoming stuff, because I think there's definitely more to talk about knives and get more into the technical aspect, which is what I really enjoy, is the actual labor, hands-on labor involved in the knife making, which is really cool stuff. So.
Yeah, for anyone listening, this was I was sitting at Denny's, and G-Webs is like, so there's a knife chat in 45 minutes. And so this is me with no preparation. If I get a chance to, a little bit warning, and I can get some knives together and get some literature together and stuff. Definitely do some cool podcasts and so on.
Right on. Well, gentlemen, I appreciate everybody coming and joining me on the panel and participating in the chat. So we'll definitely do this again. And I appreciate everybody out there watching. So we will see you next time.
See ya.
Later.
Sure.